3 weeks since it all began, day 21 of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and President Zelenskyy has stated that his country will not join the NATO alliance.
Well, we can speak now to former British Army commander in Afghanistan and former chairman of Cobra, Colonel Richard Kemp, regular on the programme. Good morning to you, Colonel. Look, what's your assessment then of this sort of shift in tone from President Zelenskyy? I think he's sort of... Is it an olive branch, do you think, or is it an act of frustration with NATO, who haven't provided him with this much-wanted no-fly zone over the country?
I think actually he never probably expected NATO to provide a no-fly zone or any other form of direct military intervention in the conflict. He has before hinted that he accepted that Ukraine would not join NATO, and also he sort of tentatively agreed to a compromise on the status of Donbass and Crimea, which are also President Putin's demands. So it looks very much like as if Zelenskyy is looking to try and end the war with an agreement with Russia. And the Russians also appear now to be negotiating in earnest. And it looks like both sides could possibly reach agreement. And it would be on Putin's terms. So it would, in fact, be a victory for Putin, maybe in the next few days or weeks.
Do you look at this conflict and think, is there anything that we did in Bosnia or Croatia that we're not doing now, and perhaps we could? There was no Russia hovering, there was no spectre of China or Russia or whatever. Was there anything we were able to do? And we were slow doing a lot of things there, but we did do some things. Is there any comparisons in your mind?
I think we did a great deal in this conflict, both in terms of diplomatic and economic action against Putin, and also supporting Ukraine with large-scale weapons supplies, which maybe could have been even greater, as well as finance and intelligence on what the Russians are doing. All of these things, I think, have helped President Zelenskyy a great deal. I think the one thing that could have stopped this from happening was a NATO deployment into Ukraine at Ukraine's request before the invasion began. That, I think, would have deterred Putin from invading it. I don't think he, despite his rhetoric, has any desire to cross swords with NATO. Having said that, once the invasion began, there was absolutely no political support in any NATO country for direct intervention by NATO, such as bombing of Russian forces or shooting down Russian planes. Those things are about the only additional things we could have done, I think, in this situation. But as I say, there was no will or support anywhere really in NATO to do that.
Your assessment then of where we're at in the conflict. Mariupol obviously still an absolutely terrible situation, but it also seems as though the attacks on the capital, Kyiv, are beginning to ramp up. It certainly looks as though Putin's got the stomach to stick at it, even if his troops are hungry and his ammunition is running out.
I think we should treat with caution the reports of a complete lack of supplies for Russia. I think Russia is still capable of inflicting huge amounts of damage on Ukraine, despite recent reports that maybe they've only got 2 weeks left of fighting in them. I think in 2 weeks they could do a great deal more damage to the country, and President Zelenskyy knows that. So I think, right now, I don't think Putin wants to go into Kiev in any circumstances, because it would be a tremendous fight and result in vast Russian casualties and probably go on for a great deal of time. In the south, he's made much more progress, and he's established his land corridor from Crimea into Russia, which is something he wants to do. And even now, there are reports coming in of Russian amphibious forces preparing to carry out an attack against Odessa, which is really the last remaining port in Ukrainian hands. And if he were to do that, that would be a devastating blow for Ukraine. I think the presence of those troops could, maybe an invasion won't occur on Odessa, but the presence of those troops alone will be enough, I think, to give President Zelenskyy pause for thought at the idea that his whole the whole coast of Ukraine could be denied to him.
Colonel, just strategically, there's one thing bothering me here, the latest thing bothering me. This capture of this hospital in Mariupol, why hold sick people hostage? Because sick people are problems, aren't they? They're not you as military people. You go in and you secure a target or whatever. Why would you want to secure a target full of vulnerable, sick people?
Well, I think it's part of his campaign of terror. But from the beginning, what he wanted to achieve was to terrorize Zelenskyy and the Ukrainian government into capitulating to his terms, in other words, surrendering. And his bombing of buildings, his rocket attacks on civilian targets, on attacks on hospitals in the past, all of this, I think in his mind, adds to the terror that he's pushing towards Ukraine. And also, of course, it does help to deter the West. If NATO had thoughts of intervening, I think all of these really aggressive acts by Putin, indicate to them that they'd be biting off perhaps more than they think they can chew by doing it. So I think it's both a message to Ukraine, but also a message to the West, as was his attacks recently on the airfields and military base near Lvov in the West.
I just want to talk to you about President Zelenskyy and the threat to him. As you know, as tensions are increasing, escalating around Kyiv, we had one expert this morning predicting that he really sees a battle breaking out in Kyiv towards the end of next week. If that's the case, how safe can President Zelenskyy be kept? I mean, do you see him being able to survive this? I mean, he's the ultimate prize for Putin, isn't he? If he's lost, then that's a huge win for the invasion.
Yeah, I think he personally can take credit for the really stiff resistance that Ukraine has put up. And if he was killed or captured and taken prisoner by the Russians, then that would be a major blow to to Ukraine's fighting spirit and their morale. And it could lead to the downfall of the government in total. So I think that's something that Putin wanted to do from the beginning. But I'm still not sure, despite what your contacts are saying, I'm still not sure that Putin actually does want to fight street by street in Kiev. It's a major target, but despite that, he's still moving forces forward in an attempt to try and encircle and threaten Kiev, which of course is one of his key objectives.
In your expert opinion, we had this very symbolic visit yesterday from 3 European heads of state going into the country. I think it was from Czech Republic, Slovenia and Poland. Huge personal risk for them heading into Kyiv, an act of solidarity with Ukraine, of course. But do you see that as being of a safety risk for President Zelenskyy? I mean, they could ultimately lead perhaps Russian saboteurs to the president, couldn't they?
Well, I would imagine this has probably been done with considerable care by both the leaders from the West and also by the Ukrainian authorities to try and ensure that doesn't happen. I've no doubt that President Zelenskyy is taking great precautions to try and prevent his capture, because he knows not only on a personal basis but also for the future of Ukraine, his continued liberty and leadership is absolutely necessary. But I think what this visit does show, is that Kiev is not under the real pressure that many people seem to think it is. Russia has not yet succeeded in completely encircling Kiev. If it had done, those people would not have got in there by land, which is the way they went in.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Sorry for interrupting you. We just got to come to the end of the interview. But thank you very much indeed. We've got a